The HOA did not just fine me, they tried to ruin my name. She is standing in my driveway with a clipboard in one hand and a handheld radio in the other, yelling that I stole work gloves from the HOA storage closet and that she has proof. Her name is Heather Caldwell. She is the Landscape Committee Chair for the Granite Falls Property Owners Association here in Tucson, Arizona, and she is blocking my car so I cannot leave for my shift. I am a paramedic, my shift starts in 40 minutes, and she is telling me that if I do not admit what I did right now, she will have my vehicle towed and my clubhouse access suspended today. She taps the plastic badge clipped to her vest and says this is not a debate. I ask her what gloves she is talking about and she cuts me off, saying a torn mailer with my street name on it was found near the trash bins behind the clubhouse and that the vendor confirmed I was the one who took the gloves. I tell her I have never been inside the HOA storage closet and I do not know what she is talking about. She says I am being defensive and that only my street is being accused, so clearly I have something to hide. I ask why only my street is being accused and she says I am being defensive. She holds up the clipboard and flips to a page covered in sticky notes, then tells me the vendor filed a report and that she personally spoke to the clerk at the hardware store who confirmed the story. I tell her I want to see the report and she says it is confidential and that I need to submit an appeal in writing within 24 hours or the fine and the access suspension will be automatic. She taps her badge again and says this is not a debate. I ask her what fine and she says $500 for theft of association property plus $250 for the investigation fee. My hands go cold. I need my car for work, my route depends on it, and the HOA has towing authority in this neighborhood. If they call a tow on my vehicle, I will miss my shift and I could lose my job. She says the clock is ticking and walks back to her cart, leaving the clipboard on my hood. I grab the clipboard and flip through it. There is a printed notice with my name, my address, and a violation code I have never seen before. The notice says I removed association property without authorization and that physical evidence was recovered. It lists the gloves as brand new work gloves taken from HOA storage. At the bottom, there is a line that says the appeal must include a written statement, a copy of my ID, and a signed waiver of liability. I take a photo of every page with my phone, then I walk the clipboard back to her cart and tell her I will submit the appeal today. She is sitting in the cart now, scrolling on her phone, and she does not look up. She just says the appeal window closes at 5 p.m. and that if I miss it, the consequences are final. I go inside, change into my uniform, and leave for my shift. The entire drive I am running through the timeline in my head. I have never taken anything from the HOA, I have never been inside the storage closet, and I do not even know where the hardware store she mentioned is located. But she said the vendor confirmed it, and she said there is physical evidence. If she has a torn mailer with my street name, someone planted it or she is lying. I do not know which. But I know I need proof fast. At lunch, I call the management office and ask to speak to someone about an appeal. The receptionist is polite and helpful, but when I explain the situation, she transfers me to the property manager. The manager is hostile from the first sentence, cutting me off and saying that all appeals must be submitted in writing and that he cannot discuss active investigations over the phone. I ask him if I can come in and file the appeal in person, and he says the office is open until 5 p.m., but that missing the deadline will result in automatic penalties. He hangs up before I can ask another question. I am sitting in the ambulance bay with my partner staring at me, asking if everything is okay. I tell him it is HOA nonsense, and he just shakes his head. I finish my shift and drive straight to the management office. It is located in the clubhouse building, a low stucco structure with a red tile roof and a small lobby that always smells like air freshener and burnt coffee. There is a line of residents waiting at the front desk, and Heather is standing near the back wall, talking on her radio. She sees me walk in and immediately crosses the lobby to intercept me. She says loudly, so everyone can hear, that I need to get in line like everyone else and that cutting in front of people will not help my case. I was not cutting, I was just walking to the desk, but now everyone is staring. She taps her badge and says this is not a debate. I get in line. When I reach the front, the receptionist asks how she can help, and I tell her I need to file an appeal for a violation notice. She asks for the notice number, and I pull out my phone to show her the photo. Heather walks up behind me and says she needs to verify the documentation before I can file. The receptionist looks uncomfortable but does not argue. Heather takes my phone, scrolls through the photos, and then hands it back, saying the appeal is missing a required affidavit form that must be notarized. I ask her what affidavit, and she says it is part of the new procedure and that the form is available on the resident portal. I pull up the portal on my phone right there and search for the form. There is no affidavit listed anywhere. I show her the portal and she says the form was just added and that I need to refresh. I refresh. Still nothing. She says I must be looking in the wrong section and that I should check my email. I open my email. No new messages from the HOA. She says the deadline is 5 p.m. and that if I cannot provide the affidavit, the appeal is invalid. It is 4:47. I ask her to show me where the form is, and she says she does not have time to walk me through basic procedures. The receptionist quietly says she can print a blank affidavit if I need one. But Heather cuts her off and says the form must come from the portal or it will not be accepted. She taps her badge and says this is not a debate. I tell her this is impossible, and she says that is not her problem. She walks away. I stand there for a moment, trying to decide if I should push back or just leave and figure it out later. The receptionist leans forward and quietly says she will email me a copy of the appeal template and that I can submit it tomorrow morning if I include a note explaining the delay. I thank her and leave. Outside, I sit in my car and check my email. The template arrives within 2 minutes. I fill it out on my phone, attach the photos of the violation notice, and send it back. Then I call my neighbor across the street, a guy named Marcus who was targeted by the HOA last year for parking violations he never committed. He answers on the second ring, and I explain what is happening. He says Heather pulled the same move on him, inventing deadlines and requirements that did not exist, and that he only got it resolved by bringing in an attorney. He tells me to document everything and to get a copy of the vendor report if I can, because Heather has a pattern of pressuring vendors to back up her claims. He says he will keep an eye on my driveway and that if he sees a tow truck, he will film it. The next morning, I wake up to an email from the property manager saying my appeal was received, but that it is incomplete because it does not include the signed waiver of liability mentioned in the original notice. I read the notice again. The waiver line is there, but there is no waiver form attached and no instructions on where to get it. I reply to the email asking for the form, and I get an automated response saying the office is closed for a staff meeting until noon. I call the main HOA line and get voicemail. I leave a message asking for the waiver form and hang up. At 10 a.m., Heather shows up at my door with a printed packet and a small binder. She says she is here to conduct a follow-up interview as part of the investigation. I ask her if I am required to participate, and she says refusal to cooperate will be noted in the file and may result in additional penalties. She taps her badge and says this is not a debate. I let her in. She sits on my couch, opens the binder, and starts reading selected lines out loud from what she says is the vendor statement. She does not show me the pages, she just reads. She says the vendor reported that a man matching my description came into the store 2 weeks ago asking about work gloves and that the clerk remembers the conversation because I was rude. I tell her I have never been to that store and I ask her to show me the statement. She says the document is confidential and that she is only authorized to share summaries. I ask her for the name of the store and she says it is the hardware store on Speedway Boulevard. I pull out my phone and show her my location history for the past month. I have never been near Speedway Boulevard. She glances at the screen and says location data can be faked and that it proves nothing. She flips to another section of the binder and says the torn mailer found near the bins had my street name printed on it, and that the gloves were confirmed missing from storage the same day the mailer was found. She says the timeline is clear and that I need to admit what I did so the association can move forward. I ask her how she knows the gloves went missing that specific day, and she says the storage closet is inventoried weekly and that the discrepancy was logged. I ask to see the inventory log and she says it is not part of the appeal process. She taps her badge and says this is not a debate. She stands up, closes the binder, and tells me I have until the end of the day to submit a full written confession or the case will proceed to a hearing with the board. She says the hearing fee is $750 and that if I lose, I will owe the full amount plus the original fine. She leaves without waiting for a response. I immediately call Marcus and tell him what just happened. He says Heather is escalating because she thinks I will fold and that I need to go directly to the vendor and get the truth on record. He gives me the name of the hardware store clerk who told him the truth during his case last year, a woman named Diane who works weekdays. I drive to the Speedway Boulevard store and ask for Diane. She is at the register and recognizes the situation as soon as I describe Heather. She says Heather came in 3 weeks ago with a photo of work gloves and asked if anyone matching my description had bought them recently. Diane told her no, and Heather got angry and said the store needed to confirm the purchase or the association would stop doing business there. Diane refused, and Heather left. Diane says she filed an internal complaint about the pressure and that her manager has a record of it. I ask if she will give me a written statement, and she agrees. She writes a short paragraph on store letterhead, signs it, and hands it to me. She says Heather tried the same thing with 2 other vendors last year and that everyone knows she makes things up. I take the statement and drive back to the management office. It is 12:30 and the office is open again. I walk in and the receptionist sees me, and before I can say anything, Heather comes out of a back hallway and intercepts me. She says I need an appointment to speak with staff and that walk-ins are not accepted during investigation periods. I tell her I have new evidence and I want to add it to my appeal file. She says the appeal window closed yesterday at 5 p.m. and that any new submissions will not be reviewed. I tell her the appeal was incomplete because she kept adding requirements that did not exist, and she says that is my interpretation and that the policy is clear. She taps her badge and says this is not a debate. I pull out my phone and show her the statement from Diane. She barely glances at it and says vendor statements must be submitted on official forms and notarized, and that informal letters are not admissible. I ask her what official form, and she says I should have requested it during the appeal window. I ask her where the form is, and she says it is only available by written request submitted 10 business days in advance. I am about to walk out when Marcus texts me. He says a tow truck just pulled up to my street and is idling near the mailbox cluster. I run outside and drive home. The tow truck is parked 2 houses down with its lights flashing. The driver is on his phone. I park in my driveway and walk over. The driver is a middle-aged guy with a clipboard, and he says he has an order to tow a vehicle registered to my address for unpaid HOA fines. I tell him there are no unpaid fines and that the HOA is lying. He says he just follows the work orders and that if I have a problem, I need to take it up with the association. I ask him to show me the work order and he hands me the clipboard. The order lists my name, my address, and a fine amount of $750 marked as overdue. The order is dated today. I take a photo of the clipboard and tell the driver the fine does not exist and that I will file a police report if he tows my car. He shrugs and says he will call his dispatcher. He makes the call, waits, and then tells me the dispatcher is checking with the HOA. He puts me on speaker. The dispatcher says the HOA confirmed the fine is valid and that the tow is authorized. I ask to speak to whoever confirmed it, and the dispatcher says she cannot transfer me. The driver looks uncomfortable now. He says he does not want to get involved in an HOA dispute and that if I can show him proof the fine is invalid, he will cancel the tow. I pull up my email and show him the appeal submission and the vendor statement. He reads both, then tells the dispatcher he is canceling the tow and logging it as disputed. The dispatcher argues, but he cuts her off and hangs up. He hands me back my phone and says I should get an attorney because the HOA is going to keep trying. I go back inside and call an attorney I found online who handles HOA disputes. He listens to the whole story and says it sounds like Heather is retaliating and possibly fabricating evidence, but that proving it will require documents I probably do not have access to. He says the fastest way to force accountability is to file a records request for the vendor report, the inventory log, and any correspondence between Heather and the hardware store. He says Arizona law requires HOAs to produce certain records within 10 business days and that if they refuse or the records do not exist, that is leverage. He charges $300 to draft and send the request. I agree, and he says he will have it out by the end of the day. He also tells me to get a doorbell camera if I do not have one already, because if Heather is planting evidence, she might try again. I order a doorbell camera that afternoon and install it the next morning. It has motion detection and cloud recording. I set it to record everything, and I download the app so I can check the feed from my phone. 2 days later, I get a notification at 6 a.m. Someone is on my porch. I open the app and see Heather standing at my door, holding a small cardboard box. She looks around, sets the box down on the welcome mat, and walks away. I save the clip and go outside. The box is open and inside are 3 work gloves, 2 of them still tagged, and a torn mailer with my street name printed on it. The mailer is addressed to someone on my street, but the house number is wrong. It is not my address. I take photos of everything, then I carry the box inside and text Marcus. He comes over 10 minutes later, and I show him the doorbell clip and the box. He says this is insane and that I need to go to the police. I call the non-emergency line and explain the situation. The dispatcher says an officer will come by later to take a report. The officer arrives at 2 p.m. He is a deputy with the Pima County Sheriff, and he listens to the whole story, watches the doorbell clip on my phone, and examines the box. He says what Heather did is technically trespassing and possibly evidence tampering, but that it will be hard to prove intent without a confession. He says he can file a report and include the video, and that the report will create an official record if the HOA tries to escalate. He writes up the report, gives me a case number, and tells me to document everything. He also says that if Heather shows up again, I should call 911 and request an officer on scene. He leaves and I email the attorney with the case number and the doorbell clip. He replies within an hour and says the video is exactly what we need and that he is adding it to the records request response. 3 days later, I get a certified letter from the HOA. It is a notice of hearing scheduled for the following week. The notice says I am required to appear before the board to address the theft allegation and that failure to appear will result in a default judgment and immediate enforcement of all penalties. The hearing fee is listed as $750, due within 5 business days. The notice also says I am prohibited from bringing recording devices or legal counsel into the hearing room and that all evidence must be submitted in writing at least 72 hours in advance. I forward the notice to the attorney and he calls me back immediately. He says the recording ban is illegal under Arizona law and that the evidence submission deadline is designed to prevent me from responding to anything they bring up during the hearing. He says he is going to file a demand letter citing the doorbell video and the vendor statement, and that he is going to CC the entire board and the management company. He says if they do not cancel the hearing and drop the charges, we will file a formal complaint with the state and pursue damages. He sends the letter that afternoon. The next morning, Heather shows up at the management office while I am there filing a follow-up to my appeal. She sees me in the lobby and immediately walks over, holding a printed packet with highlighted sections. She starts reading selected lines out loud in front of everyone, saying the vendor confirmed the theft, the inventory log shows the gloves went missing the same day I was on site, and that the board has voted unanimously to proceed with enforcement. She says I have one last chance to confess and avoid the hearing fee, and that if I refuse, the association will pursue full legal action. She taps her badge and says this is not a debate. I stay calm and tell her I have video of her planting evidence on my porch and that my attorney has already sent a demand letter to the board. Her face goes blank for a second. Then she says the video is irrelevant because I am editing it and that the board will not be intimidated by threats. She turns to the receptionist and says she needs to file an emergency motion to block my appeal and that I need to be removed from the lobby for creating a disturbance. The receptionist looks at me, then at Heather, and quietly says she cannot remove anyone without a manager present. Heather pulls out her radio and calls for security. Security is a part-time guard named Ray who works the clubhouse entrance on weekends. He walks in, sees the situation, and asks what is going on. Heather says I am harassing staff and that I need to leave immediately. Ray looks at me and I tell him I am filing an appeal and that Heather is trying to intimidate me. Ray asks the receptionist if I was causing a problem and she shakes her head. Ray tells Heather that I am allowed to be in the lobby as long as I am not disrupting business, and that if she has an issue, she needs to take it up with the manager. Heather says Ray is not following protocol and that she is going to file a complaint against him. Ray just shrugs and walks back to his post. Heather glares at me, then leaves. I finish filing my follow-up and go home. That evening, Marcus texts me and says he just got a notice from the HOA saying his guest parking privileges are suspended pending review, and that the notice cites a complaint filed by the Landscape Committee. He says Heather is retaliating against him for helping me and that he is going to file his own records request. I tell him to include the attorney in the email chain, and he agrees. The next day, the attorney calls and says the HOA responded to the demand letter with a formal denial. The response says the vendor report exists and is valid, the inventory log is confidential, and the doorbell video is not admissible because it violates HOA privacy rules. The attorney says the privacy claim is nonsense and that we are going to file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA enforcement. He also says he is going to request a copy of the response under public records law, because if the vendor report actually exists, it should be part of the association's official files. He files the request that afternoon. 2 days before the hearing, I get an email from Diane at the hardware store. She says her manager called her into his office and showed her a letter from the HOA demanding that the store retract her statement and confirm that I purchased the gloves. The letter is signed by Heather, and it threatens to terminate the association's vendor contract if the store does not comply. Diane says her manager refused and forwarded the letter to corporate. She attaches a scan of the letter, and I forward it to the attorney immediately. He calls me 10 minutes later and says this is extortion and that we need to move fast. He says he is going to contact the board president directly and demand an emergency meeting, and that if they refuse, he will file a lawsuit for defamation and harassment. He makes the call while I am on the line. The board president, a retired accountant named Ed, answers and listens to the attorney's summary. Ed says he was not aware of the vendor pressure letter and that he will investigate. The attorney says the investigation needs to happen before the hearing and that I am not attending unless the charges are dropped. Ed says he will call an emergency board session and get back to us by the end of the day. He hangs up. If you want to see how this ends, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you do not miss the rest of this story. At 4 p.m., I get a call from Ed. He says the board reviewed the evidence and found several discrepancies in Heather's documentation. He says the vendor report does not exist, the inventory log shows the gloves were never logged as missing, and the torn mailer was brought to the clubhouse by Heather herself 3 weeks ago. He says the board is dropping all charges and issuing a formal apology. He also says Heather is being removed from the landscape committee and that the association is reviewing her conduct over the past year. I ask him if the apology will be in writing, and he says yes, and that it will be posted on the resident portal and mailed to my address. He apologizes again and hangs up. I sit there for a moment, trying to process it. Then I call Marcus and tell him the news. He laughs and says he knew it would fall apart because Heather always overplays her hand. He says he is going to request his own apology for the guest parking suspension, and that he is going to make sure it is public. I tell him to copy the attorney, and he agrees. The written apology arrives 2 days later. It is a single-page letter on HOA letterhead, signed by Ed, stating that the charges were based on incomplete information and that the association regrets any inconvenience. It does not mention Heather by name, and it does not admit fault. I forward it to the attorney, and he says it is weak but sufficient to close the case. He also says the complaint with the state is still active and that the department will likely audit the HOA's records as part of their review. He says if they find other violations, the association could face fines and oversight. I thank him and pay his final invoice. The total cost is $1,200, but it is worth it. The following week, I get a notification on the resident portal. The HOA has posted a new policy requiring all committee chairs to submit monthly activity reports and vendor correspondence logs, and stating that any member found to be misrepresenting facts or pressuring vendors will be removed immediately. The policy is clearly a response to Heather's conduct, and it is effective immediately. I screenshot it and send it to Marcus. He replies with a thumbs up and says the guest parking suspension was lifted and that he got his own apology letter. He says Heather has not been seen at the clubhouse since the board meeting, and that rumor is she resigned. I do not hear anything for 2 weeks. Then, on a Saturday morning, I get a knock on my door. It is Ray, the security guard. He says he wanted to let me know that Heather tried to get back into the clubhouse yesterday using her committee key, but the locks were changed and her access was revoked. He says she made a scene in the parking lot, yelling at staff and threatening to sue the board, and that she accidentally dropped her entire key ring in front of everyone while trying to unlock the door. He says people were recording it and that the video is already circulating in the neighborhood group chat. He grins and says he thought I would want to know. I thank him and he leaves. I check the group chat and sure enough, there is a video of Heather standing in the clubhouse parking lot, shouting at Ray and fumbling with her keys, which fall to the ground and scatter. The video cuts off as she bends down to pick them up. The comments are brutal. People are calling her out for the theft accusation, the vendor pressure, and the retaliation against Marcus. One commenter says she was always a bully and that the board should have acted sooner. Another says they are glad she is gone. A month later, the state audit results are posted on the HOA website. The report finds that the association failed to maintain proper vendor records, failed to document committee decisions, and failed to follow its own appeals process in multiple cases over the past 2 years. The report recommends a full review of all enforcement actions taken during that period and suggests that affected homeowners be offered refunds or fee waivers. The HOA is forced to produce records for every violation notice issued in the last 24 months, and the contradictions become public. Several homeowners file complaints, and the board announces that it is hiring an independent management company to oversee enforcement going forward. Heather's timeline is proven false with timestamps from the doorbell camera, the hardware store's internal complaint log, and the management office's email server. The vendor who was pressured files a formal complaint with the HOA and terminates their contract. The association scrambles to find a replacement and ends up paying more for the same services. Heather's name is quietly removed from all committee rosters and her contact information is deleted from the resident directory. I run into Ed at the mailbox cluster one afternoon and he stops to talk. He says the board is grateful that I pushed back because it exposed a lot of problems that had been ignored for too long. He says Heather was able to operate unchecked because no one wanted to deal with the confrontation, and that my willingness to document everything and involve an attorney forced them to take it seriously. He says the new management company is already implementing better oversight and that the board is working on a formal policy to prevent retaliation. He apologizes again and says he hopes I can stay in the neighborhood. I tell him I am not going anywhere and that I appreciate the changes. He shakes my hand and walks back to his house. The neighborhood is quieter now. The enforcement patrols are less aggressive. The violation notices are more reasonable, and people seem less afraid to push back when something does not make sense. Marcus and I still joke about the keyring video, and every time we see Ray, he gives us a nod. Heather is gone, the HOA is under scrutiny, and I have a police report request that makes the story official and stops the rumor mill. The whole thing cost me time, money, and stress, but it was worth it to clear my name and make sure she could not do it to anyone else. One evening, I am sitting on my porch when a neighbor I do not know well walks over and introduces herself. Her name is Angela, and she says she lives 3 streets over. She says she was targeted by Heather 2 years ago for a landscaping violation she did not commit, and that she ended up paying a fine because she did not know how to fight it. She says she saw the audit results and realized Heather used the same tactics on her, and that she is filing a complaint to get her money back. She thanks me for standing up and says she wishes she had done the same. I tell her it is not too late and that the board is reviewing old cases. She smiles and says she is going to follow up. She walks back to her house, and I sit there for a while, watching the sun set over the desert. A few weeks later, I get an email from the new management company asking if I would be willing to serve on a resident advisory committee to help revise the enforcement policies. I agree, and the first meeting is scheduled for the following month. At the meeting, I meet Angela again, along with Marcus and several other homeowners who had similar experiences. We spend 2 hours going through the old policies and identifying the gaps that allowed people like Heather to abuse the system. By the end of the meeting, we have a draft proposal that includes mandatory documentation, independent review of all fines over $250, and a formal appeals process with clear deadlines and requirements. The board approves the proposal a month later, and it is added to the association's governing documents. The whole ordeal taught me that HOAs can be brutal when someone in power decides to target you, but that the system can be forced to work if you document everything, stay calm, and refuse to back down. Heather thought she could intimidate me into confessing to something I did not do, and she almost succeeded. But the doorbell camera, the vendor statement, and the attorney's records request exposed her lies and forced the board to act. The keyring video was just the final humiliation. A perfect piece of karma that showed everyone what she was really like. The HOA is better now, the neighborhood is safer, and I have a story I will never forget. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.